I have a Pacific pool that I installed in 1980, and the pool coping is finally breaking apart. I wish a company would make covers for this coping made out of aluminum vinyl covered like is used in vinyl siding. They call it trim metal. If someone could make the lightweight aluminum vinyl pieces for these, then it could just be caulked on or glued on. Money-making idea for some young man. I have tried making this repair 2 other times. One time with JB Weld, and that was the last time, and that didn't hold. And I tried Bondo with fiberglass strands in it that they call Bondo hair, and that didn't work well either. However, both times that I did that, I did not prime the fiberglass with a good automotive primer, which I'm going to do this time, and just use regular Bondo, because Bondo will really adhere to primer when it won't adhere to anything else. And regular lacquer primer will stick to almost anything, even glass, as long as it's clean. It'll stick to almost anything, so this should make a good bonding agent using a high quality lacquer primer. And the primer I used came from Napa, and it's really good stuff. The fiberglass filler I used is Bondo brand. Everybody calls fiberglass filler Bondo, whether it's made by Bondo or not. But it works real well, but on a real hot day, like it's 90 today out in the sun, you won't have much working time. I'd say you'd have about 2 or 3 minutes, so mix just a small part at a time. Pay attention, follow the directions to the letter on this can, because you do mix the red hardener with the Bondo. Now, if you've ever watched any of my videos before, I try to explain things in very basic terms where even if you've never done this before, you'll have no problem doing it. Now, here are some of the things you'll need. Bondo, of course, and the little tube of Bondo hardener, which comes with the can under a plastic cap. I used a razor blade scraper at the top. I used a putty knife at the bottom, and I used a Bondo spreader, which can be bought at Walmart, the Bondo brand spreaders. They come 3 to a pack. This one's been cut in half. But you can also buy the Bondo and hardener. Like I say, it comes together. You can buy that at Walmart or any auto parts store. Mix your Bondo up on a piece of cardboard or a clean piece of plastic like vinyl siding. I use an old paint stick to stir it in good, and I keep scraping it off with my little spreader here. You got to mix it real good. It'll turn kind of pinkish once the red has blended in with the gray. And when you've got it all mixed in good, which won't take you but 20 seconds, then you apply the Bondo to both edges of the coping, which you'll see later in this video, with the little yellow spreader. You just kind of butter both pieces with that Bondo, and you have to work fairly quick, so don't mix too much at a time. Take your time, do it right, butter both pieces and stick them together. It'll harden in just a very few minutes. Now, this is what they call a Bondo board, and you don't have to have this. I do a lot of body work, so I've had one of these. This came from Napa, and it has little tear-off sheets that do not absorb the Bondo hardener. But you can just mix it on a piece of cardboard. I've done that a lot of times. Or an old piece of vinyl siding. That's great. Cut it up into small pieces and use it just for this. Now, it depends on how particular you're going to be with this repair. My coping has been painted so many times that it's rough to start with. But this is a finishing putty. It's a lacquer putty, they call it. Comes in a tube. It's red. And what it is really is partially dried lacquer paint. It's condensed into a paste. Now, you use the lacquer putty on top of the Bondo, the final thing. And this is to fill in little pinholes in the Bondo. Now I said this lacquer putty was condensed paint. I need to correct myself. It's actually red primer that's condensed into a paste. Just wanted to clarify that. Now since my pool coping is not new and it's kind of rough, I doubt that you'd see any pinholes. And since I'm going to use a latex paint over this, it would fill any pinholes anyway. If you decide to use this lacquer putty, just use something like 3M wet or dry black sandpaper like 320 or 400 grit and wet sand it. Wet sanding is far better than dry sanding because your paper will stay clean and last longer. Just put a drop or two of dish detergent in some warm water, put your sandpaper in and let it get soft, and then you can use it. This Napa primer, the lacquer primer, is as good as anything any professional uses. Now I usually buy primer in a quart and mix it with thinner and shoot it with a professional gun, but this is just as good as what any auto body professional would use. I highly recommend it. I would recommend this over a lot of cheaper enamel primers, cheaper lacquer primers. Use this. You'll be satisfied with it. Another tool I have, and you don't have to have this either, this is called a cheese grater, and you can buy just the blade. You don't have to have the handle as shown here. After a few minutes, like 5 to 7 minutes in the hot sun, the Bondo will start to set up. Depends on how much hardener you put in it, how quick it hardens. But before it completely hardens, and when it's still soft enough to use this cheese grater, then you can take that and grate off the fiberglass that you may have too much of. It'll really help cut down your sanding time. The biggest mistake that most people make is putting too much Bondo on at one time, and then they have all that really hard Bondo to sand off. So don't do that. Having a tool like this Dremel tool shown here with the optional cable, I used what they call a burr. Now they make these burrs in carbide burrs, and it's just a little grinding tip, a little cutting tip. But carbide burrs are for metal, and you really don't need that. You can find these little burrs at Walmart and Lowe's hardware, because you need to get the old glue. If you've done like I've done, used glue on it before, all that has to come off for anything to stick. Never try to put a glue on top of another brand of glue. That just doesn't work. Trust me, I know, I've done it too many times. So make sure you've got both surfaces clean, and this worked really, really good on this coping. I removed all the JB weld, took it right down to the fiberglass, and it leaves a good surface for the Bondo to adhere to, and the primer. Now I have some strap-on knee pads, but I like using a foam pad because it's just too hot out in the sun with those protective kneecaps on, sweating and making a mess. So I just use an old piece of foam rubber, use a carpet, use a towel, anything that you can kneel on to make your work go easier. Now I don't need to tell you, but you need to be careful here. Make sure you're using a 3-wire grounded extension cord, and be very careful with your extension cord around water. I don't need to tell you that. You're smart enough to know that. But it doesn't hurt to add a little disclaimer here. Also wear a good mask and eye protection. You can use the little throwaway masks that you can get at any auto parts store. You don't need to be breathing this old glue or the fiberglass. After I used the Dremel tool with the little grinding burr, I went over it with my electric drill and a wire brush, and was really surprised at how much additional debris that it removed. And of course you want your Bondo to adhere to the parts that you're sticking together, not to the debris. Now here's a close-up of the little burr that I used on my Dremel tool. Now I'm ready to start grinding off the old JB weld on both pieces. And also trim down the edge. If you've got any sharp edges, trim those down. More photos of all the broken places I have in my coping. Now, as you know, the best way to protect this fiberglass coping is to prime it and paint it and keep it painted. That way the UV rays won't break down the plastic so quick, the fiberglass so quick. After you have used your Dremel tool or whatever it is that you're going to use to remove that the old glue, and after you've used the wire brush, when you're through with all that, as you see here, there's a lot of dust left behind. Take your vacuum cleaner and clean all that dust up so the Bondo won't be sticking to the dust. That's very important. Here I've given both surfaces a good coat of primer. That'll dry quickly in the sun. 20 minutes you ought to be ready to start your Bondo. And I have some finished photos here of the repairs I've made. Now what I'll do on top of this Bondo, I'll wet sand it with like 320, 400 3M paper, and when I've got it to where I want it, maybe I'll use the lacquer putty, maybe I won't, but when I'm through doing that, then, and everything's dry of course, I'll use this Bullseye primer that you can buy at Walmart. It's really good primer. Like automotive primer, it'll stick to anything. It's white, it's water soluble for easy cleanup with just water. And then after applying the Bullseye primer, and when it dries, of course I'll go over it with probably 2 coats of exterior gloss latex paint. I'll mask off with masking tape around the pool liner so I don't get any of this primer or anything on the pool liner or the latex paint, because it's really hard to get off vinyl. But after doing that, I also put a piece of tape along the edge of the concrete so I don't get paint on the concrete. It just goes a whole lot quicker doing it that way. Now you see a gap around my coping, between the coping and the concrete. And what I use there is the genuine GE pure silicone caulk. I'll fill that crack with silicone caulk, and it can even withstand pressure washing. It's really good stuff if you buy the GE. Other stuff is junk. I've used it. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little video and maybe it helps you. I've been doing paint and body work as a hobby for 30 years now. And we'll see if this Bondo holds up using the primer, and I think it will. If it doesn't, hey, I'll be honest with you. I'll go to YouTube and I'll admit that it didn't work. So, stay tuned. Thanks for watching. You can see well over 100 automotive do-it-yourself videos as well as history videos of Lenoir, North Carolina and Caldwell County. Just Google Bill Tate YouTube videos and it'll take you right to it. I've been doing this for years. I hope you enjoy my videos. See ya!